Hey guys, welcome to Through the Bible Verse by Verse, a plain and simple study through the entire to the entire Bible, book by book, chapter by chapter, and verse by verse. We are currently in Genesis chapter 34, and we're moving along in Jacob's journey. He has spent the last 20 years of his life actually building his family. God had blessed him with, at this point, 2 wives, 2 concubines, and 11 sons. But his experience through these 20 years haven't been without heartache. His uncle had mistreated him, cheated him. I mean, even from he had worked 7 years to marry Rachel, and yet when it came time to get married, his father gave him Leah. And then he had to work another 7 years for Rachel. And then he worked another 6 years for his wages. God had blessed him in that. And then God tells him, go back to your land, go back to your home, go back to your father's home. And then he had to overcome 2 major fears in his life. One was leaving Laban, which turned out to be true as he was leaving. Laban pursued, and then when Laban caught up to him, before he had reached Jacob, God intervened and told Laban, watch how you talk to my man. Okay, so that was that fear. Another interesting thing about that too, you saw how Jacob valued people, and I'm saying that coming up in a couple of chapters. His next greatest fear was facing Esau, his brother, who, remember, the last time he saw him 20 years earlier, Esau had vowed to kill him, and so that was in his mind. And as they ventured out, as they marched forward, another interesting thing about Jacob was that you see his obedience to his faith. God had told him to march out, and so in his faith he marched out, but he was incredibly fearful. But he still obeyed God. So that's kind of a plus there. He obeyed God despite fearing that he would be murdered by his brother. And in doing that, it's kind of funny because he put the slaves first, the children of the slaves with them. Then he put Leah, which I said we're going to see later on how God will honor Leah despite that she was unloved, unwanted. And then he put Rachel and Joseph, who's young at the time, last. But we're going to see how God honors them. All right. So verse 1. Jacob stops in a town of Shechem, and we're going to see how this turns out, which will not turn out well. So verse 1 says, Dinah, Leah's daughter, whom she bore to Jacob, went out to see some of the young women of the area. When Shechem, son of Hamor, the Hittite, and the prince of the region, saw her, he took her and raped her, and he became infatuated with Dinah, the daughter of Jacob. He loved the young girl and spoke tenderly to her. Give me this girl as a wife, he told his father Hamor. Now, what's interesting about this, and again, I want to remind you, from this moment unto Christ, we're going to see how ungodly could be, how sinful sin could be. In our culture, we live in kind of a fantasy. It's projected. We live with images, and oftentimes they're false images. So here's what I mean by this. Think about when you think about the 1950s or the 1940s. People think of those times as the golden years of America, when America was at its purest. Right? What you saw on television and the images that you saw was nice suburban homes, mother, father, children. The wife stayed home and the father went to work, and everybody was happy and loving. But those were images. The reality is sin was still sin. They just covered it up. Right? White girls got pregnant, but when they got pregnant, they went to see Aunt whoever, right? Aunt May for the summer. You still had incest. You still had murder, drunkenness. My point is, those things wasn't kind of popularized through the media. Well, but when we look here, and let me say this: the difference is that our laws were different. That we did have laws that help guide us and keep us away from rampant sin. So that's what the law of Moses did. And when we come to the law of Moses, one of the things we're going to see is that standard of law, and we'll break it down once we go through, the law of Moses, that there is that what the law of Moses, in a sense, gave to the world was a standard of right and wrong. Not necessarily following the precepts of Israel, but what is right and wrong, and let's base laws upon that. So, for example, murder. Now, during this time that we're living in, there was no law. There was no right and wrong. Even Israel, remember, did not have the law. He's obeying God's commands, but there's no law to what they're doing. So, doing from this time all the way up time to Moses, remember, there's no law. So, when we see this here, there is a general knowledge, but very, very limited. There's the general knowledge, and this knowledge is how can I say this? It's almost like we're going to see this later on in the book of Judges. Every man was doing what was right in his own eyes. So this young man who was the prince, he sees Jacob's daughter, he rapes her, but here's the irony: he still loves her and he wants to marry her. So the proverbial, he certainly built the barn door before the barn, right? He put the cart before the horse. Okay, we can go on and on with that, but he sees her, and you can tell, right, his entitlement, his privilege, where he rapes her first, but yet he still loves her. Now, of course, the problem is that he certainly, and as God is now growing the seed of Israel, we're going to see God is very careful about how the seeds mix. All right, so verse 5, Jacob heard that Shechem had defiled his daughter, Dinah. But since his sons were with the livestock in the field, he remained silent until they returned. Meanwhile, Shechem's father, Hamor, came to speak with Jacob. And Jacob's sons returned from the field, and when they heard about the incident, they were deeply grieved and angry. We're going to see this, how bad. For Shechem had committed an outrage against Israel by raping Jacob's daughter, and such thing should not have been done. Hamor said to Jacob's son, my son Shechem is strongly attracted to your daughter. Please give her to him as a wife, and to marry with us. Give us your daughters to us. Give your daughters to us, and take our daughters for yourself. Live with us. The land is before you. Settle here, move out, and acquire property in it. Then Shechem Shechem said to Dinah's father and brothers, "Grant me this favor, and I'll give you whatever you say. I'll give you whatever you say. Demand of me a high compensation." Actually, it could also be translated dowry instead of gift. "And I'll give you whatever you ask me. Just give the girl to be my wife." Now, besides oftentimes marriages, not only were they arranged, but they were oftentimes arranged for political alliances. But remember, he actually loved Dinah, even though he raped her. All right. Verse 13. But Jacob's sons answered Shechem and his father Hamor deceitfully, because he had defiled their sister Dinah. "We cannot do this thing," they said to them. Giving our sister to an uncircumcised man is a disgrace to us." I want to go back and look at this one statement right here. I just kind of missed. Well, he says, "Give us your daughters," and just an observation. It is possible that, well, I'm going to say it's more. I'm going to say that it's more possible that Jacob had more daughters. They're just not mentioned, and certainly daughters that would come. So that as he's asking, "Give us your daughters," it could be, "Hey, in this, you're joining with our community, right? Then yeah, you marry our daughters, we marry your daughters," like that. All right. Verse 15. "We all agree with you only on this condition. If all your males are circumcised as we are, then we will give you our daughter and take your daughter for ourselves. Live with you and become one people." Now remember, this was a deceit. "But if you will not listen to us and be circumcised, then we will take our daughter and go." And the words seemed good to Hamor and his son Shechem. The young man did not delay doing this because he was delighted with Jacob's daughter. Now he was the most important in all his father's house. So Hamor and his son Shechem went to the gate of their city and spoke to the men there. Remember, that's what the men would do. They would sit at the city gate. They would not only hang out, play dominoes and cards, laughing here, but they would also conduct city business. So then he says, "These men are peaceful towards us," they said. "Let them live in our land and move about in it, for indeed the region is large enough for them. Let us take their daughters as our wives and give our daughters to them." Now this is something that God would not want. Okay, so I'm saying this as a foreshadowing of about what's about to come. In other words, God under no circumstances wanted this kind of intermarrying with Israel. Okay, and so let's go back. Verse 22. "But the men will agree to live with us and be one people only on this condition: if all our men are circumcised as they are, all their livestock, their possessions, and all their animals become ours. Only let us agree with them, and they will live with us." Now, what's kind of amazing is that I'm kind of wondering that if I'm one of the men of the city, and I'm thinking to myself, what? Circumcised? You want me to do what? Right? It's like, really? And just for those of you who do not know, circumcision is the cutting of the male genital, the foreskin around the male genital. All males are usually born with their penises having foreskin. So the circumcision that was commanded by God to Abraham and his descendants, and watch this, his descendants only, was to cut off that foreskin. Okay, today people get circumcised for religious reasons. But there is no religious reasons to get circumcised. So whether you do or not, just understand there's no religious reasons for that. These men are going to agree to do it because what? As marriages go, they see Jacob as being blessed. They see the cattle, and they're saying, "Hey, we're going to gain here." Okay, the son, Hamar's son, loved, Dinah. So, all right. So he says, "I want their livestock," verse 23, "their possessions and all their animals become ours. Only let us agree with them, and they will live with us." And all the able-bodied men listened to Hamor and his son Shechem, and all of the able-bodied men were circumcised. Ouch! And it says, and on the third day when they were still in pain. Now I want to get to that. So as they are getting circumcised, right, cut it off. That's a very painful thing. Now I'm circumcised. I'm glad I had my mother did it when I was a child, and usually under the law it would have been 8 days. So in other words, now I don't know when they circumcise babies now, but so verse 20. For again, all the able-bodied men listened to Hamor and his son Shechem, and all the able-bodied men were circumcised. And on the third day, when they were still in pain, they didn't have morphine back then. So he says, two of Jacob's sons, Simeon and Levi, Dinah's brothers, took their swords, went into the unsuspecting city, and killed every male. They killed Hamor and his son Shechem with the sword, took Dinah from Shechem's house, and went away. Okay, brutal kind of murder here, because they murdered the entire city. We're going to see the law will say that will be unlawful for them to do, to murder the entire city, to hold an entire city accountable for Hamor, right? So, and this is of course very brutal, vicious on Simeon and Levi. So they took, verse 27 again, Jacob's other son came to slaughter and plunder the city because their sister had been defiled. They took their sheep, cattle, donkeys, and whatever was in the city and in the field. They captured all the possessions, children, and wives, and plundered everything in the house. Then Jacob said to Simeon and Levi, "You have brought trouble on me, making me odious to the inhabitants of the land, and the Canaanites and the Perizzites. We are few in numbers. If they unite against me and attack me, I and my household would be destroyed." But they answered, "Should he have treated our sister like a prostitute?" Well, no, he shouldn't have, but should you have murdered the entire city and plundered the entire city instead of just the one man who defiled your sister? Later on, Jacob will mention that. He's going to mention them. And as we can see here, they are the sons of Jacob will not prove to be godly men at the beginning. I'm not even sure they're going to be godly men at the time of their death, okay? But again, we can say this, there are different times, and in this different times, there is no law, right? In other words, everybody's just kind of doing whatever they want. But that was a very cruel thing, and Jacob's going to mention that at his death in terms of what would be called the blessings. Okay. All right, guys. I will see you in the next study. All right.